Welcome everybody in. Today is one of our security sessions panel discussions. Like always, we've brought together some great thought leadership in this space. I'd like to thank Will, Chris, and Stas for being here with me today, leading up to the weekend. We do have an interesting conversation we wanted to delve into. So before we get too far into this, I'm going to turn it over. I'd like, if you don't mind, each of you to maybe give a brief introduction. Will, maybe you could start with yourself. Let us know a little bit about yourself, what you're working on, what your background is.
Sure. So, I'm Will Klusovsky. So I'm the Chief Security Architect at Avertium. We're a full scope end-to-end security services organization doing consulting and managed security services. I've been in the industry for 23 or 24 years now, with more than half of that time been in consulting, with a little bit of time starting from the U.S. Marine Corps and a little time with some retailers.
Very cool. Well, thank you for being here. Stas, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief introduction.
Sure. So my name is Stas Bazuka, kind of like bazooka. I've been in the information security space for about 20 years as well. This is the only thing I've ever done. My background is mostly information security, but in the financial services section. My background is very technical, and currently I'm the CEO and founder of Compyl.
Very cool. Stas, I believe I heard you on the Defense in Depth podcast that came out this morning. It was a great listen. That was pretty cool.
Thank you.
And Chris, if you wouldn't mind giving us a brief introduction as well.
Sure. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at NB Power. That is New Brunswick Power. And that is not New Brunswick, New Jersey. That's New Brunswick, Canada.
Hey.
So yeah, I'm in charge of all things security, both cybersecurity and physical security, at the local utility here that is responsible for making sure that we literally keep the lights on across the province. And we are the major utility here. Prior to this, I worked in security consulting for a long time, and that was where when I joined what was Integralis, which has changed names at least 3 times now. And I was a recovering auditor, and that's where I worked together with Will.
Awesome.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you, the 3 of you, for being here. I'm going to actually kick this off with Stas. I'm curious to kind of just get your thoughts on the idea of incidents and breaches continue to rise year over year. All it takes is a quick Google search, and you see the big names now, as well as the little names, or the main names, I should say, you're maybe not so familiar with. And I think that a common concept that comes up with this in the security and technology field is just the idea of bringing cybersecurity, information security into the limelight as a priority for an organization. So I'd like to kind of just have you expand upon the concept of, why do you think cybersecurity and information security aren't a priority, although we see the rise of breaches and incidents year over year?
Well, that's a good question. I was actually at a conference earlier this week with a number of different CISOs, and this topic came up a couple of times, where like the budgets are actually decreasing in a lot of sectors, especially in the security space. I think a lot of it really comes down to being able to quantify the actual risk to the organization, and it's crazy how many people still cannot put together a proper risk management program. I know there's been a lot of talk about the FAIR system as well for risk management, but just being able to focus on fundamentals and explain to the C-suite and the board level executives what the risk to the organization is, and what practical steps can be put in place for an organization to be able to secure itself better, and to be able to focus on priorities and actually get them done for that organization, and put a road plan together. I think a lot of companies are still struggling with the fundamentals in an organization. Obviously, the larger you are, the harder it is, but they're I think in a nutshell, we need to focus on fundamentals and make sure that we get them right, and that we maintain them going forward.
Interesting. Will, spending so much time on the consulting end, you've had obviously an opportunity to speak with a ton of different organizations, I'm sure on various topics, but when it comes to just the priority of cybersecurity and information security, is there a commonality in where kind of the pitfalls come in, or why maybe it wouldn't be prioritized in one organization over another?
Yeah, it's interesting because, as someone working and delivering in information security, everybody we talk to, that's what they're doing, right? So the idea that it's not prioritized is kind of like, we don't see that. What we see is, oh, I have limited budget, right? So you have organizations that have only so much money to spend, and so what we tend to do, and what I tend to do when we work with organizations like that, is help figure out where the best place to spend that money is. So it's not always, oh, they're not doing anything about security, but they only have so much money that they can spend. So part of that is being able to prioritize the risks so that you are spending money. Like I like to say all the time that you are locking the doors before you're putting laser beams in the air ducts, right? So that you're getting the most out of your money. And then having a plan. The other part, a big part of consulting is, making sure that that CISO has all of the ammunition they need to go back to the board and say, hey, look, we're improving, but there's still risks, and here's how you're going to get, here's how you're going to get your return. Cybersecurity is not always an ROI type of thing, right? So there's more creative ways that we have to work with our clients to make sure that they get the money they need.
Interesting. Yeah, you brought up some good topics that I think we're going to dive into in a little bit. But Chris, I wanted to give you a chance to kind of how you think about prioritizing security from your standpoint, whether it's physical or cyber information.
Well, yeah, so that all starts with a business impact analysis. What is it that we can and can't do without? So for critical infrastructure, for me, that is making sure that we still have the ability to deliver power and generate power and move power around the province. And if we are focused on that, then that's where most of the effort should be, and there would be less priority put on other things that may traditionally be part of what would be an information security program. And that's one of the things that's kind of opened my eyes here is that before coming into a power company, we talk about InfoSec. Information security is not key to a power company. Yes, we have customer information, but your power up goes out, you might die in winter. We lose your information, that's a big privacy problem, but you're not going to die.
Fair enough.
It's, you prioritize it, you do that business impact analysis, that drives your risk assessments,
Yep.
your prioritization, and what you need to focus on in your security program overall.
I'd like to chime in on that because I think it's super important for those of us in the security industry to understand, because Chris is in the business, right? And this is what CISOs are challenged with. And I don't have to tell him is, or companies create these really cool products that do all this really cool stuff. And they're like, oh, mine's better than everybody else's. Yeah, but does it fit, right? The analogy I use is I would love to have a Porsche 911S turbo, right? It's an amazing car. But my Ford truck does what I need it to do, right? So when you're dealing with limited budgets, understanding what you can spend your money on so that you can keep the lights on, in Chris's case, literally, right? And having that prioritization, it's not always about getting the best product. It's, we talk a lot about, threat actors and the baddies being sort of, at war. No business wants to go to war. Business has a job, in Chris's case, to keep the lights on or to sell your widgets or to make your product. And the job of the CISO and everybody in security is to make sure that that job can happen, not to implement the coolest new security stuff, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Will, it's interesting.
It's a good point, and sorry, you say, hey, we want to get the latest, coolest stuff in there. We have a tendency in the security industry to think that we that whatever it is that we're saying and whatever risk that we have is the most important. And, you know, that's sort of the tendency of a lot of people is my project is always the most important. But then you have to realize that in security, we are a business enabler. You're there to make sure that everything else that we do in the core business is done safely. In rare cases, you may actually be the core part of the business, but generally in the industry, no, you're there to make sure that the core part of the business happens and that it happens safely.
Yeah, I have a former colleague, Andy Hudson, who used to say, if your company is an automobile, we are the seatbelts and airbags. Security is not supposed to be exciting.
I want a cooler seatbelt.
Yeah, no, nobody buys a car because you may buy it because of the safety things, especially if you're buying it for your children, which tends to be, but you know, you don't buy it because of that. You buy it because of the way it handles or the cornering or however, and does it achieve, is it haul enough things that you need it to do, right? You don't buy it because it's got airbags.
I'm certainly not buying a car that doesn't have a seatbelt.
Or airbags.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Table stakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, often security is seen as a cost center, right? And we have to be seen as a business enabler or not the office of no, right? So that's why when I opened up with you know the first question, like it has to be a reasonable level of security that has to be applied because you do have to enable the business. And a lot of people forget that. I mean, I'm sure we've all worked in organizations where security has been just, especially in larger organizations, my experience has been it's been red tape and blockers all the way through. Even when we're trying to get things done proactively, it's really difficult. And like with this modern, like with how fast technology is moving and how quickly like the threat actors are expanding and adapting, like we need to be able to respond just as quickly, and like we need to enable that change in an organization to be able to do that.
For sure. Will, you said something really interesting, and I'm curious from your perspective. While you speak with, I'm sure, many information security kind of professionals, are you often part of helping those searching for a solution also kind of identify what a budget for a solution would look like?
Yeah, ideally, you know, you want to partner. At least organizations I work for and where I work for now, like we want to partner, right? We're not going to, we're not interested in a transactional relationship, right? So for us, being able to meet with the CISO and their team on a regular basis, have them share their roadmap. You know, I have history of kind of doing this through my past at many places I've worked where, you know, when the CISO is ready to go through budgeting, you know, we'll bring in our team and say, okay, you've got this IAM project. We think this is what it's going to cost you to get it done. Here's the resources you need. Here's what it's going to go. You know, sometimes that information can be based on an assessment. Sometimes we're just bringing in our third-party information. But the more we can, again, help that CISO have all the information they need when they go get to the budget that it's most accurate, then that's the best way to do it, right? That's the best way to leverage those partners, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting. Oh, go on.
If I may add to that, understanding what their budgeting cycle is important, and what the timing is, because if you miss that timing and you're going in and you're trying to as a consultant or a vendor or something, and you're trying to convince them of the latest thing, you're going to have to recognize that may not happen for a year.
Mm-hmm.
Until the next budgeting cycle, and that opens up that they can actually spend.
Yeah, and that's the best way we would do it, and I would do it is you have that relationship, and so when Chris as the CISO is ready to do his budgeting cycle, he calls Will, I come in the room with whoever else we need to get together, and then we work on it together collaboratively, and then they get the benefit of having that outside information, that third party to kind of help it up instead of them having to do a bunch of random research. What does DLP cost these days, right? How are we going to migrate, blah, blah, blah. Instead, we can say, hey, look, we've got all these projects. We've done it in the past. Here you go. And then on the consulting side, you know, full transparency, we now know what we can potentially help with in the future, which makes all of that sort of supporting process after the fact even easier. Because you're not going to have random, you don't have to worry about random people trying to sell you something you're not ready to buy because you've got your partner already engaged.
Okay.
Well, you're still going to have them
We'll
knock
still
on the
get
door.
still
Yeah,
get
they're still
5
going to knock on the
solicitations a day, but you know.
They're still and I'm still going to get requests to fill a system analyst role too.
And for our CISSP.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because you know, Stas, just set the table here, right? So, you know, you're part of you're a vendor selling a solution. Will, you're advising clients on solutions, and Chris, you're the guy that you know, everyone's trying to get to, right? You know, at the top of the food chain. So it's interesting to have a well-rounded table here to have this chat. Stas, you know, there was a couple things there said in regards to buying cycles, and also I think something that hasn't been said yet, but I'm sure Will and Chris would agree. There has to be some value that a security professional could understand that can be translated to management as far as the proof, right? We're lacking here. This is the problem. This is the scope, and these are the gaps, or this is the solution. Stas, with Compyl, or just with your experience in general, how do you go about kind of demystifying the conversation, moving it away from just the cost? Because the cost is going to be there. You're going to have to get there. The numbers are going to have to work, but providing a solution and showing the value before a customer can actually, you know, become a customer.
I think this is going directly back to Will's point, right? Like we build partnerships. We're not just transactional. We need to understand what this customer is actually doing, why we're on the call, right? The worst, I don't know if you guys can relate to this, but like the worst thing that could happen is you're on a call and they don't know what they want, and no one knows why we're really on the call. I mean, this has happened to me many a times.
Never happened.
No, never. But if the customer is serious and they know what they're trying to, you know, what they're trying to get to and what they're trying to fix, then there's nothing better than building that with them, especially if you can build a relationship with them, you're on the same page, and then you can talk about deliverables and agree on timelines, and on those deliverables, and you know, when they're going to be able to see an ROI. So I generally approach a conversation with, this person has a problem and I have the skill set to potentially solve it, and how do we provide either a solution or service or whatever it is to get them to where they need to be, and is there a good fit here for all parties involved? And then the other thing that I think is interesting that's finally happening in the industry is a lot of vendors, consultants, suppliers, whatever, everyone's starting to talk to each other. Everyone's starting to share data. Like we're actively talking to our competitors, and we're like figuring out what they're doing, and what, like, it's my experience that this has not been the case for the past, in the past. And I think it's just really interesting that there's just a lot of data sharing, and I think it's probably a direct result of just the amount of data breaches that we're seeing, and just people just getting nervous.
Yeah, I think one of the big things also that's interesting to talk about, and Chris, I'd like to know your thoughts. How do you evaluate when you're coming up against a new project? Is it time to bring in an additional resource, or is this the kind of thing that I need to outsource? How do you think about that?
Well, generally that's pretty clear, because you know that your current workload, you know the stuff that you're working on, and you know, very rarely do I have somebody who is available to take on a huge new project. So you've got to start shifting things around. It comes down often to, first of all, is this a short project? Do I have the skills in-house to be able to do this or not? If I don't have the skills, then yeah, I'm definitely going to look to outsource. If it's a shorter project, easier to outsource. If it's a larger project, then I'm probably going to do that in-house. And very often it depends on my company's appetite to hire at that time. And you know, everybody's been at companies where that appetite changes over time. So if I'm unable to get something done because the company's not letting me hire, then I need to outsource. And I know that when I was working at a consultant, trying to get some business in. Actually, one of my power peers are in Nova Scotia, next province over. I was told, oh no, you're not going to have any success here. We actually got slapped for doing too much outsourcing, so we now have to bring things in-house. So you have to understand that there may be other external pressures, especially in the public sector, or any regulated business, where there aren't just internal pressures saying, well, you know, it's because of financial results or whatever, we decided that we're not going to hire, or we're not going to hire in that department. There may be other factors that if you are working in the services industry, trying to get into a customer, you can probably get a lot of that information from the news or from talking around with your partners and contacts in the industry for that sort of appetite, and for is there something real there or not?
Okay, I found this on.
No. Interesting.
Hold
Hello.
on.
I was like,
Someone
oh, someone else? Yeah.
I had the answer for
yeah.
you.
But Chris, I assume it's because the risk had probably gone up too high about having too much outsourced, or like a key man risk kind of situation where there's too many functions that were outsourced. Is that
no, it's actually due to rates, because power rates are regulated, and therefore because everybody wants cheaper power. Then they were saying there's this oversight whenever you are applying for rates, that all of your projects are then opened up and reviewed by the local energy utility board.
Right.
And so what's capital, what is OpEx, and so then they say, well, you're spending too much in this area, you're spending too much in that area, maybe you should change that. And so there are things that are not under your control, because the rates for power are controlled. Now, that's not, you know, I recognize that in the energy industry, that is something that is a little bit more unique. Telecoms might have some of that. I wish Canadian telecoms had. Because, oh my God, it's the most expensive cell phones in the world.
I'm Canadian. I understand this pain, but I live in New York. But I completely get it. Yeah.
It's interesting though, because I've, you know, I like like you have a pretty clear cut version of or a more clear version of when to insource, outsource it. One of the things I always sort of preach is, if you don't have the skills to do it, then don't just take somebody and expect them to be able to do it and get the same result. You know, there's a lot, especially in newer technologies, there's a lot of things that tend to get, like DLP, I think like 35 or 40% of the deployments fail right within the first year. And that's probably an old statistic. It's a newer, you know, it's more stable now. But again, even if you're embarking on something new, a lot of the times it's not just about that technology, but okay, how are you going to manage it, right? This project doesn't have just an implementation cost. It has a governance cost and a management cost, and that may require you to hire people, right? And you may need to hire those people to manage it, but you may need to outsource the implementation of it, because the example I always use is, you know, my microwave broke a while back. I know I'm basic carpentry. I'm a pretty handy guy. I could take the old one off the wall and put a new one in. But if I do it, something's going to inevitably happen. I'm going to hurt my back. I'm going to be upset. It's going to take me 2 days of effort, but I can just pay somebody a couple $100 to come in and get it done, because they do that all the time. And sure enough, the guy shows up and 15 minutes later it's put up, right? And that's sort of, you know, that's a very smaller scope version of that. But a lot of times, if you want to get the thing implemented right and then get it into that management process, it's about, you know, just paying for the talent. And I think in Chris's case, you could probably argue, hey, this would be more efficient if we outsourced it, at least the implementation or the strategy or maybe the management, right? You don't have to do all of it. There's ways to cut it.
For implementation, that is something that is certainly something that in most cases, I'm probably going to outsource it if it's a new technology. If it's something where it's hey, I already have 8 of these firewalls and I'm going to put in an extra 2. My guys know how to do that. But you know, now it's just a matter of, do I have the capacity? But if I'm bringing in a completely new technology, new process then yeah, I'm going to bring in the people who know this stuff best. They're going to advise it. They're going to train my people. And then later on, if I find that that I still need some tuning or something, then I'm going to reach out to that partner again. But that's when it's related to, say, technology, but sometimes it's processes. You know, we talk about policies and things like that. Do I have the skills and resources internally to develop these policies, or is this something that I need to go somewhere else to say, hey, look, you know, I would love to do this, but I just can't do it. And that may be risk assessments or whatever.
Yeah. No,
in today's world of data
privacy,
we get into the data privacy office and the legal counsel, and a lot of times they're getting involved. It can get messy for sure.
Oh yeah, privacy. Yeah, lawyers. Leave that to lawyers. I looked into that as a security practitioner. Nope, that should be done by lawyers.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure.
That's interesting. You know, Chris, you were touching on the idea of just new technologies, emerging technologies, maybe that just you internally don't have the bandwidth, maybe the experience with. Are there any specific technologies in the last few years that you've seen that you've been interested in, that you're looking at or bringing into kind of your security fold? Anything you're evaluating?
I think we might need an NDA for that one.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of stuff that if I were to talk generally, you know, you go around conferences and you see what sort of things are hot, and that changes from year to year when you go to conferences. Like what seems to be really hot right now in the market, at least on the vendor side of things, everything is around the endpoint, and it's much more about what can we do in the in XDR and EDR,
yeah, for sure,
and all of that, and then Will, I think maybe in a recent LinkedIn post you said NDR. It was like, isn't that just IDS? Well, it kind of is, except that it adds in that a little bit more of the automated response stuff. So you know, who knows? But either way, you know, somebody will be talking about that, and then we'll go in and figure out that doesn't work as well as we hoped it would. So we're going to go back into UBA and all the behavior stuff, and it's all about logs and activity monitoring and seeing what we can spit out from there. And then that doesn't work, and so we go back to the endpoint or something else.
It's trial and error, right? I mean, it's just troubleshooting at a very high and expensive scale until you get it right.
Well, we are seeing like that shift, and and the NDR joke was every few years we go from endpoint to network, and we are seeing a shift now in SIM, right, of what it does. I remember, you know, not to plug a product, but I remember when I first, you know, when I first started working with Microsoft products and saw what Sentinel did versus how every other SIM worked, I was like, well, that doesn't make sense to me. It didn't, because they were looking at it differently, right?
Yeah.
So we're starting to see that in kind of how we monitor, how we manage. There is the MDR, XDR, all of this, you know, type of stuff coming out, and so I get where you're coming from. It's just it's entertaining, it's fun to watch, but yeah, it's still, at the end of the day, it's coming down to, you know, are we able to monitor things as quickly as possible? Can we automate things? That's the big thing I'm seeing a lot of, right? Is people talk about the evolution of the SOC, and so automating as many things as you can correctly, right? That's the other part of it, is you know, being able to make decisions that are actually impactful and not creating more risk, right? So I think that's a lot of the trajectory, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing with AI and machine learning within the environments now is really starting to change the way that we look and manage security.
For sure.
Yeah. What I am interested in the evolution of is there's a lot of attention that's paid to IT, because, you know, it's easier for people to get their hands on and learn. And there's a lot of IT environments. Once you get into an OT environment, there's much less standardization. and most people just can't set up, hey, here's a transformer in my home lab. So what do I do to set up a SCADA network in order to make sure that that happens, and test and see what sort of things that I can do to break it or secure it. You know, just run a UDP scan and everything will.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just ping it.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but seeing how the OT cybersecurity world is going to evolve in a way that doesn't roll over all of your critical devices there is going to be interesting. And I'd like to see what I'm always interested to see what sort of things that people come up with for how we can improve on things when you still have all of these old technologies and old communication protocols around, and they weren't designed to even be networked.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, and this kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier at the beginning, which is like I was building an OT IoT security practice at the time. I remember when somebody told me this was a thing. I was like, "What are you talking about? I have manufacturing clients not even running IDS. They're going to buy tools for their shop floor? No, it's not going to happen." And then lo and behold, you've got all of these products now that can non-intrusively detect all that, because they all kind of came from the asset management place. You know, their original intention was, oh, I need to find all these devices to make sure they're working, so I'm making a bunch of money. And they realized they could start to add security features onto it. Now we can feed it to a SIM, but they kind of skipped over this whole risk assessment analysis, GRC element, right? So I kind of see, like, that's kind of where I see the next evolution. We're starting to see those. There's still some of those point products out there, and even they're I don't want to name a bunch of products, but certain products bought up other ones to sort of fill their portfolio, and then platforms are buying them up. And so it's going the way everything sort of does when the people innovate this new idea, and the big people buy it up, and it just becomes part of the service. We're there in some places, but it hasn't fully evolved, to Chris's point, because we used to do we would use those technologies, and we would, run the scanning, but then we would add on some threat modeling. We would take a look at now your environment. Now the OT organizations, we would always go talk to the manufacturer, and they'd be like, "Oh, it's air gapped. It's fine," because they wouldn't let us test it.
Right.
And then we find out, well, guess what? It's not. And so now this is part of your PCI program because it's connected to the same network, and you have a flat network, and you didn't bother to look at it, right? So
hold on. OT systems is part of the PCI network?
No, but no, I'm saying if they were because they thought
nightmare fuel.
No, because they thought their OT environment was air gapped and it wasn't connected to the network, but it was connected to the network, and they had a flat network. So because they were transacting on that same network, if you didn't segment it, it became part of it. So, or it's now.
So it is the nightmare fuel.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's
exactly what it is, right?
So, oh my God!
Just an example.
Every 90 days.
on some on some PDM or whatever. So yeah.
Stats, is there any kind of emerging or trends you're seeing as far as what organizations are kind of in need of or evaluating at kind of today?
I mean, I think a lot of this is coming down to there's just a shortage of information security folk, right? Although there's so many people. I mean, Will, Chris, sorry, I don't have you on LinkedIn, but Will, I know you're getting bombarded with people asking, like, how do you break into this field? And like, so am I. But there's still very much a shortage, and especially like a shortage of just of people that have been doing this for a long time to be able to advise and point customers in the right direction. I think the emerging pattern here again is what what Will is saying, like SIEM is being flipped on its head. The zero trust networks, which is a buzzword and has been for a while, but I think people are starting to finally put that together. Yeah. I think there's going to be a really heavy focus on like machine learning now and AI, especially with the chat GPT. I think that's really putting into perspective like what can actually do when it's actually put in into the right context. So I think a lot is changing, but at the same time, I think there's still a lot of problems in the fundamentals, because if you look at it, right, I mean, like 90% of breaches are all still taking place because somebody clicked on a link, or they got spammed on Slack or on Teams and somebody clicked on something. So while there is a lot of new and cutting edge and innovative technology, there's still, the basics still need to be implemented.
Yeah, we just did our 2023 threats ahead and look at the past trends, and that I always look at the statistics from both the breach cost and all the other analysis, and then what we see with our clients. And it's always people, right? There's always that
people.
It's always a human element. But it's interesting, there are a few things that if you do them, greatly reduce. So at the end of the day, we'll all say, Chris probably doesn't want to hear it, but everybody's going to get breached or is at some point, right? So reducing the cost of that breach, a few things really help with that. And employee training was right up there.
Yep.
Having machine learning and AI in some capacity was up there. And having, if you are in the cloud, having that migration complete was a big deal, right? So if you have a complicated security system, an environment full of disparate technologies that don't always work together and maybe missing people, like the more complex the environment and the less sort of you finish that migration, the higher it costs when the breach actually happened.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the migration is a lot easier said than done, right? I mean, there's so much legacy hardware and software that's still running out there that just don't even know how to do it, or how to even convert it into like a VMware, or into a VM box, or put it on like EC2, and like
that's why we work in security and not IT.
That's it.
I'm just saying, I'm not putting my power control systems in the cloud.
No,
AWS West goes down, and all of a sudden the entire
everything goes in. Yeah, for sure.
I know there are definitely exceptions. I was happy to see I did a presentation with some of our clients and took some polls, and like employee training is one of those things we've all recognized that it has to happen more than once a year, and
for sure.
Statistics show doing it regularly throughout. And you've got these really cool tools that can test you for phishing, and if you do well, leave you alone if you do bad. And most organizations are actually doing it more often. So I'm actually kind of not at a loss, but it is one of those things where somebody's going to click on a link, somebody's going to do something, and it's not always wrong. Sometimes people are just trying to help, right? They're trying to do the same thing, and it's hyper vigilant as you can be. I think even the most hyper vigilant person could still make a mistake, and then that could cost the company millions of dollars.
For sure. And it's not often that it comes out of like malicious intent. I mean, sometimes you get a rogue actor, but that's the exception, not the norm. But it's it's usually people trying to help.
Critical infrastructure. I get it.
Yeah,
the time.
yeah. There you go. There you go.
But what's key? Awareness is a big thing, and that needs to go hand in hand with understanding that awareness is not going to be 100%. So you need to do what you can to contain things as quickly as possible and remove the human from that. So I know that, yes, my users are going to click on phishing links, and then it tries to download malware, but they can't because they don't have the rights to do that. Or there is the exceptional user that has a Cobalt Strike beacon downloaded, but I'm able to contain that and it doesn't get anywhere.
Defense in depth.
So you have to have those safeguards in place. One, to say, please don't do this, and two, if you do, we're doing what we can to make sure that there are protections in place to minimize the impact that something is going to happen.
Yeah, that's great. That ties kind of to the prevalence of cyber insurance that I've seen. Again, when it first came out, a few people got it, and now everybody has it. I think almost every client I know has it in some form. But then, have they read it? Do they know they need an incident response retainer to get paid? In your case, everything you said, Chris, was like just brilliant. Even a small business can do that, can put those minor controls. So if I do the wrong thing, I can at least contain it. But then you need to make sure you have the right type of people who can come in and clean up to make sure that everything is actually gone, and that's not the only bad thing that happened.
Well, yes, but I'm talking about before it gets to that point. Absolutely, incident response retainer is important. But if I know that a beacon has been downloaded and I have something in place so that I don't have to actually send people in to contain it, it's already contained, or we're quarantining them or something like that. From a as much as possible, you want to remove the human from that equation,
For sure.
because machines can do things much more quickly. So you want to automate as much as possible, because like the four of us here, we're slow in getting slower. Machines are getting faster.
Yep.
And so the more automation that you can put in there and make sure that it's tuned to make the decisions that you want it to make, then that will really help. But absolutely, everything fails. So, you're absolutely right about having that incident response retainer. Yeah, just in case, because otherwise you don't want to be sitting there, especially if you're a power utility.
Yeah.
Hey, the power is out in the entire province for 3 days, and that means also that you can't fly in because you need the lights on in order to get planes in.
We're not going to talk about
bring
the
in the incident response retainer. Yeah,
That's so funny.
I have nightmare scenarios without end.
I was at a conference with the CISO of the FAA on Tuesday, and he would not talk about this. But also just like getting before, like going from like needing insurance to getting insurance and now to renewing the insurance, that's become pretty difficult for a lot of folks as well.
Yeah, rates are going up like crazy, and nobody's not buying it. Everybody is still.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the questionnaires are becoming a little bit more diligent, because before it was like, do you have antivirus? And you're like, yes. Do you have like, it was just super basic, but now they're actually starting to check.
Yeah, I'm actually having conversations with my departments that handle the insurance and saying, only if you feel you need it, because it's getting less useful. After was it Merck got their 3.5 billion payout, or however much that was. Yeah, it's painful for the rest of us, and it shows just how
prevalent,
volatile that is, and it's just getting worse for us.
Yeah, they're in the market to make money, not to.
Yeah,
I mean, they're not going to tell, hey, have you done a full risk assessment? Don't read that fine print. That's fine. And then
yeah, there were when I was in Japan, I was and the cyber insurance field was still fairly new. There were some companies that were coming and asking me about, what sort of things should we do for cyber insurance, because it's a new field and we feel that we should get into it. We want to make sure that we're not getting there. What sort of questions should we ask? And we had some conversations and then followed up with them and found out that a lot of those companies, because Japan is very risk averse.
Oh yeah.
They wouldn't insure companies of a certain size or larger. So it was really only small and medium-sized businesses, and then later on they just only did small businesses, and said, yeah, it's there's just way too much risk for us to be able to get into that market. One payout and
it's done.
That'll kill us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Well, I'll say the three of you did not disappoint.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, of course. This was a great conversation. I mean, just so much information kind of disseminated. And I think these are the kind of conversations we hope for, that we're able to kind of bring thought leadership together and kind of really just cut the red tape, and let's just dive into it. Thank each of you for making time for this today. I'd like to stay in touch. Hopefully have you guys on the next episode or one in the future.